So our thought of this would be make it a little more interactive. It's near the end of the conference. The last thing we all need is more PowerPoint slides to stare at. So we thought we would basically just sort of introduce ourselves, give a few key points. What I'm going to do is put notes. So I've assigned each of our speakers to have 3 key points to remember if you're going for a grant. So our goal at the end of this day will be successful if we have 9 key points that you've all had a chance to comment on and think on, and then you can all take a picture of that slide, and that can be like a handy, refer to this when working on your RO1. Does that sound like a reasonable goal and objective for the day? Great. So we should introduce ourselves. Ben Abella, University of Pennsylvania, Vice Chair for Research there, and been doing NIH grant writing for quite a while, and I'll allow my colleagues to introduce themselves, and then we'll start.
That's right, we have to use this, don't we? All right, so I'm Manish Shah. I'm Vice Chair for Research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have been NIH funded since 2006, I think now, and all of my work is around aging research, health services, and clinical trials to some extent.
Hi, it's wonderful to see all of you, many faces that I know and love already, and I look forward to getting to know the rest of you over the next hour. So I'm Megan Ranney. I'm an associate professor at Brown. I direct our emergency digital health innovation program. I do research on the use of technology to facilitate public health in the emergency department with a particular focus on violence and mental health. And I've been NIH funded since 2013.
Awesome. And maybe it's a little too big to have everyone go around, but at least we can get a sense of the room, perhaps. I'm curious, how many of you are faculty currently at a program? Okay. How many of you have K Awards currently? Okay. How many of you are working on a K Award as we speak, or thinking about a K Award, or dreaming of a K Award, or have heard of a K Award? Okay. One of my best quotes about a K Award, so K Awards are a funny thing. They're training grants that are important as you go into NIH. That's okay, I like standing, it's good, it keeps me awake. That's fine, it's a coffee. K Awards are an important sort of rite of passage in many ways. However, chairs of emergency medicine are increasingly less thrilled about them because you may or may not know the dirty secret. It actually costs departments a lot of money. So my favorite quote on this, I'm sure you won't mind re-quoting him, Richard Zane at Colorado, who's very supportive of K awardees. So take this with a grain of salt. I was at a meeting with him and someone's like, oh, I'm so old, I don't even know how to spell K award. Funny joke, right? And then Richard Zane is, oh, I know how to spell K award, E-X-P-E-N-S-I-V-E. Expensive. So I thought that was an interesting little chair quote. All right, so I'm going to turn to my colleagues. Maybe Megan or Manish, you go first? Anyone? Megan, maybe first? And so the charge we've given each of the 3 of us is a little 3 to 4 minute vignette on like how you got to where you are, specifically with a focus on grants and scholarly development, and then your reflections having succeeded and failed variously in the grant world.
Absolutely. Megan. So my story is going to be a little shorter than theirs. How did I get to where I am? I think that, like many of you, I started knowing that I wanted to do a research career, right? Knew that I loved research, the process of thinking, creating questions, process of writing papers, but started at the time when I got interested in research. At that point, my department actually didn't have much research infrastructure. There was like one person with external grants. We had no grants administrator in the department. An incredibly minimal research infrastructure and set of mentorship. Put in my very first grants to EMF and to the SAEM Foundation. Got my first grant rejected because I didn't format it correctly. I think it's back when you may have been a chair of a committee at some point. Literally didn't meet the margins, right? Super. Well, you did eventually. That's part of my story too. But so started, with a bunch of major, just absolute abject failures. Finally decided I needed to get a little more training, so did a research fellowship with one of the few people in my department who did have research funding, a guy named Mike Mello, who continues to do research, and got my first grant from the APHA soon after I started fellowship. I got the grant based off of something that my fellowship mentor told me to do, which was motorcycle helmets, which I do nothing with now. But it was a grant, and it really allowed me to kind of have that first process of trying to run a study. Over the next few years, as I finished fellowship and then went on, I submitted a gazillion more grants, got very lucky, got a small C grant from my department, actually with a colleague and a colleague of mine at Brown, Esther Choo, and we used that first grant to serve as the pilot data for what went on to actually be the rest of everything that I do now was based off of that first very small $5,000 grant from my own department. Research fellowship, developed skills, and then started submitting larger grants. Again, submitted. Finally landed with a research training grant application to the SAEM Foundation in 2010, I think, because I got it right when I was pregnant. I was on bed rest with my second kid when I got the notice of award, and so I had to kind of delay the start of the award. And then submitted Ks. Finally got my case funded right towards the end of the research training grant, so it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It gave me pilot data. It allowed me to continue to develop my skill set, and then have been fortunate since there. Really built out my network over that process. So a few things that I did that I think were key along the way. I found external mentors. My department has grown a lot. We now have a great research infrastructure, but found a lot of really great external mentors, both content, but also methods, and also career mentors, of whom Manish is now one, to help guide me. Submitted a gazillion grants along the way, learned every time, right? Reviewed grants, so I think that that's an important part of the learning process, is the more that you're involved in reviewing, the more you start to see errors and strengths, and then you get better at shaping your own. And then just kind of continuing to expand your network. And we'll talk more about that as we get to our top 3 points. But when I think about that transition from K to R, or even more so now at this point for me, the R to R, right? You can't keep writing the same grant over and over. And so thinking about kind of what's your tweak going to be, how do you build up a solid body of expertise, but also allow yourself to create stuff that's innovative. And we'll talk more, but that's kind of that's a 3-minute, very high-level overview.
Do you want to do your 3 points now, or should we do the points at the end? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
points at the end. Okay, that sounds good.
So I think you're going to see a theme here a little bit of kind of a classic way in general to get grants, which is a lot of wandering around aimlessly. And that's okay to some level. So I did the Robert Johnson Clinical Scholars Program for my research training, finished that. Very similar department I ended up in. They had, I think, 1 K award, no research manager, no nothing, really no infrastructure except an enroller program that was completely dysfunctional. And trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do. And so I actually got an internal grant early on something that, like, I don't think I've done anything on this topic ever since. Then it was like how to teach medical students how to care for geriatric patients. We got 10 grand, did a little bit, but it was enough to start building that foundation so that I moved essentially to the pre-K, and what's now called the GenStars was called the Janigan back then. 2 years of funding, which allowed me to get some preliminary data to then try to write a K award. So I submitted the K award for once. I submitted it a second time. Back then you could submit it a third time. Then I still didn't get it funded, so then I submitted it a fourth time, and then it finally got funded on the 5th time, which, yeah, it's kind of wild. My wife was like, you're either going to get divorced from me or you're going to get funded, one of these two. And the reason why I say that is sometimes it just has to be either be boneheaded or having perseverance to try to get the funding. During that time, though, it was a little bit of finding small internal grants here, internal grants there, to try to at least collect the data I needed to try to get that K. So I got a Beeson K, which is now called a K76. The numbers have changed. Which really made the difference because it gave that protected time to start getting stuff done. Very much became a time of creating my networks, building my lab. Now, you know what, if you do basic science stuff, you build your lab. You have lab positions, you have the hood, you have chemicals, whatever you're doing. If you need mice or rats, you get those. In clinical research and in health services, we don't necessarily think of it that way, but I would encourage you to think of it that way because that's exactly what I did. I built my EMS research lab. I got all the EMS agencies on board. I got the people I needed to work with on board and created that infrastructure during my K award in order to then springboard into future grants. And this is where the aimless wandering starts a little bit. So I was worried a little bit about funding, and so I had an opportunity for a HRSA grant that was really more service delivery, but you could spend 15% of the budget doing evaluation. So we put that in and it got funded. I had this opportunity to do some telemedicine stuff, which sort of was related, and we put that in, and that was an AHRQ RO1, and on the second shot, that got funded. And then it became the R to R transition. So I actually ended up with a U01 from the CDC, and then an RO1 from NIH. The point being, Money is green, green is good. That's what keeps your lab going. Do it. And regardless of where you're going to get, whether it's Foundation, HRQ, NIH, HRSA, CDC, whatever the case might be. Just to put in context, and this is a little bit outside the scope of what we're normally talking about here, then there's another transition you get into post-R to R, becomes this R to a mid-career K, or the R to center grants, which is the transition I'm living in right now, which is a complete different ball of wax that I'm learning a lot about. I think I'm going to stop at that point, turn it over to you, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So my story. So I started out, again, with sort of pilot grants. And I think I agree completely with the point of money is money, and so you got to start somewhere. Putting a K award together is a daunting task. It's a big thing. One of the most important things about a K award, different than maybe going from an R, although not so different, is having the right mentorship. Training and mentorship. So you can't just say I'm going to write a K and just put one in without a solid mentor who knows what they're doing to guide you on that. It's just not going to work because there's so many intricacies. From the simple, as Megan pointed out, formatting, right? You can get dinged just like having the wrong structure or wrong font size, to the much more profound, having the aims locked together in the right way and avoiding a whole bunch of fatal errors, which sometimes experienced people call kiss of death items in your grant. And you wouldn't necessarily know about these without appropriate mentorship. So I found a mentor, Lance Becker, who's now chair at Northwell and does resuscitation research. And it made all the difference because he really understood the game of the NIH and how to put something together. And I was lucky enough to get my K funded on the first go-round, which in retrospect was really bad for me because it made me totally, like he was like, Ben, don't, this is not going to happen again. Like, you're spoiled now. Because I'm like, oh, it's easy. You write a grant, get a grant. Big deal. I've had plenty of failed grants since then. Do not worry. But I got lucky, and that got me started. And then one of the errors I made that I've recovered from, but it was instrumental, and I want you to avoid this error too, that I think is going to be one of Manish's key points, is start on the R earlier than you think. If the minute you get a grant, you got to start thinking about the next grant. It's painful. The honeymoon period is a lot shorter, right? You just put in all this effort, you get it, you're like, yay, I'm on easy street, I can just work on the project. No, you got to immediately say, okay, what's next? Because it just takes a long time to incubate the next thing, develop it, and so forth. And so I didn't do that. And so I made the fatal mistake of actually like thinking, oh, I'm going to like work on my project for my K. Silly me. And then it got to sort of year 3, 4, I started to do it, and it totally failed and had this scary period where my funding dipped. I'd already hired people. I had like this team. I had a few other smaller grants. And it was like one of these, am I going to like foreclose on my family farm or not, I got lucky, things sort of worked out, I got an R finally, and didn't have to foreclose on the farm, so to speak, just in the nick of time. And then with our funding, I've had some PCORI funding and so forth. So now we've sort of continued and grown our team, which has been great. And I also do clinical research. So it's true that a clinical lab isn't very much a lab. I mean, it's a team, you have employees, you have sort of a modus operandi, you have lab meetings where people update. So it feels very much the same. So folks who go into basic science or clinical research, the sort of operational feel is actually more similar than different, I think, in many ways. And then I've sort of continued at Penn through that. But one of the things that I've learned over the years, and this isn't one of my key points, but just to sort of share with you some of the lessons learned, is that it sort of like never stops. And so this research career is not for the faint of heart. Because there's never an easy street. And I've had 2 or 3 periods subsequent to that first initial scare where, again, I had all these people, I had this annual budget, and they're like, Abella, where are the dollars coming from? You're going to have to let some people go. And, stressing, having an ulcer, And each time I narrowly escaped defeat through some cleverness, hustle, something to keep the thing going, which I imagine if you talk to people in startup businesses, they'd say that's totally the gig. Like, you're constantly running out of money, constantly hustling the next dollar to keep things going. And that's sort of what's worked. And so you have to sort of be brave. And I think like in a startup business, there will be flashing warning signs of budgetary mayhem and calamity. And you say, well, just got to keep doing it and just keep putting in grants and so forth. And it's sort of worked out. Do you have a reflection on this kind of?
So I have 2 things to kind of go off of what you've just said. So number 1 is kind of what your lab and what to do when you reach those kind of funding downstreams, or when you're kind of reaching the end of your grant. And so for me, I mentioned before that finding collaborators was a key part. So one of the things that I've worked really hard at is I have my lab, right? Like I've got my group, but I've also developed some wonderful relationships with folks both inside and outside of Brown. And so, for instance, I have a mentee who just got a K. I'm going to share one of my lab members part-time with her, which helps her with her K, also helps me with my budgets, right? Ditto, we just got an STTR with another colleague. I'm my project manager on my RO1. I'm going to put him 10% on as the project manager for the STTR, which helps to then extend my RO1 budget, right? Like anticipating I'm in year 2 of this RO1, like my R20, you know what I mean? So you're like constantly shuffling. So thinking about kind of working with your collaborators, and that's part of the great thing about having a team of co-Is who you work with, some within your department, some without. And I know I'm looking at Kate here. Yale certainly has a great example of that, that in the best possible world, I think you create like a departmental infrastructure. The other thing is about kind of having the grant. So for those of you that have a K right now, or maybe are like in some other form of early career grant that you're thinking about going to the RO1, I agree that you can't start writing grants too early. I think it's really important to stay in the grant writing game. I think you can do that somewhat with co-Is. During your K is a period where you're free to everyone else because you can't take extra salary support, right? So I got on as a co-I on a whole bunch of grants during the last 3 years of my K that then have turned into funding for me that kind of like have carried me through as I didn't have my R1 yet, and have developed into these collaborative relationships. So that's kind of one thing is write grants with co-Is. I do think it's important to concentrate on your project. I think one of the reasons why I got an RO1 relatively easy, I'm totally going to screw myself for the next grant, but I got my R relatively easily was because I worked my butt off on making sure that my science was like profoundly good and that my follow-up rates were, so I do clinical trials, right? I do intervention development. My follow-up rates were like Gale level, right? Like it was like I have like 90, 95% follow-up rates at 4 months, 6 months, which was a pain in the butt. It was a lot of training of the research assistant. The last thing going off of what you said is to create a great support staff. And this will actually go into my tips for the RO1. But my mentor said this to me many times when I was starting, and I didn't believe them because when you're junior, you feel like you need to learn it all yourself and you need to do it all yourself. The trick to being a great researcher is having great people around you, not just great co-Is, but great staff. And the trick to what I'm doing right now is the guy who was my RA my very first year of my K left, went to Chicago, heard I got my RO1 and said, hey, I want to work with you again. He's now become my lab manager. And so I've given him like a salary raise, but he manages all my stuff. And so having those relationships and those really trustworthy people to write your IRBs, to manage the participant logs, to double check to make sure that your RAs are like not misentering people into your Excel spreadsheet or RedCap or whatever, is the trick to give you the time to then go and write the next grant. Those were not any of my 3 tips, but just as you were talking, yeah.
Actually, you covered what I was going to say. Maybe we should either, that's what I was going to say, is do that and then jump into 3 tips.
Yes, any reflections, guys, and what we talked about, questions for us, and then what we'll do is we'll focus Q&A with each of our 3 goals on what we know. So, questions, and maybe she can answer.
Phil.
I was going to ask Megan, as you were talking about getting different co-Is as you were kind of building up your support system on your K, were you like a co-PI on those? So did that affect your early investigator status at all as you went to your R, or how did you manage that?
A great question. So that's going to be one of Manish's. Yes, I'm going to hold on that, but I'm just going to say no. I did not give up my early investigator status. We'll talk more about that. That's a great and really, really important question. Manish has a lot of thoughts there. Yeah, no, do not be a co-PI until you can take effort. Absolutely, positively. Be strategic.
And the other thing is co-PI, the NIH looks carefully at that and often askance at that. So the multiple PI, co-PI thing, for those who don't know, is a relatively new NIH sort of thing. And I in general, plenty of exceptions. It so depends on the study section. But
it also depends on your institute.
All of these
Usually,
things, right.
yeah.
So this is difficult. So take what I say with a grain of salt. But in general, They don't favor really junior folks as the co-PI, where there's like a senior-junior combo. What they like to see is that there's a good scientific reason for co-PIs, where maybe you're doing some new translational lab assay in some clinical scenario, and one of the co-PIs is an experienced clinical researcher, and one of the co-PIs is an experienced lab person on that assay. That totally makes scientific sense as co-PIs. But at the co-PI where it's like senior-junior guy, they're like, yeah, this is just an attempt to get his junior guy's resume looking good. This isn't really what it's about.
Which actually is a really good point. So on that K to R transition, one of the most difficult things about writing my R was I put a bunch of the people who had been my mentors in, and I was like, well, so-and-so is going to mentor me. No. When you write your first RO1 or even your first R21 or RO3, you are the PI, and they are there to support you, to provide scientific purpose. They're not there because you need a little mentorship in something. Like, you put them in for a very specific purpose, and you have to articulate what that is, and that is not to shore up your insufficient skills. It's because you need that complementary expertise in the grant.
Other questions for the group? This is your time, open mic time.
I have a question about budget. One of the problems I have is like a new RO1 submission person is I have to build my team and put people on it that are really experienced and have RO1s. And then other people that have successfully completed RO1s are like, you need to make sure you have a project manager. You need more than 1.5 FTEs of RA. You need to make sure you have a statistician. You need to make sure you have a data analyst. And then I build the budget and I'm like, okay, well, I need $1.5 million a year now. So people are giving me great advice in terms of like how to structure things. But at the same time, I have like 4 co-investigators because I wanted to build a great team. I have like a faculty statistician. People said I needed my own project manager, you know, more than 1.5 FTEs of RAs, and especially with the AHRQR ones, they're not that much money with indirects.
So this was actually one of my 3 top tips, was to build your budget in conjunction with your aims. And this also goes into that point about having your co-Is as co-Is. Your co-Is are not co-PIs. So if you're writing your grant, your PI, you should be probably 20% effort as a PI, maybe less if it's like an R21. Your project manager is your most important person. You want that project manager like a minimum of 50%, especially if it's your first grant. And if it's a big grant, you really want them at 100%. You need adequate staff to do your grant. And then the co-Is fit in. And it may be that you have to put someone as a consultant instead of as a co-I, right? And then that saves you a ton of money. It may be that you realize, ooh, I just, with my RO1, as I was doing my budget, I was like, oh, these 2 people who were both mentors on my K have the exact same area of expertise. I can't put them both on at 5%. You guys talk amongst yourselves and choose.
I think the, and I don't know, Ben, if you want to stick this on as one of them, since we've already done one of the top.
Sure, why not? Why not? Let's do that.
This is the hardest part.
We're going to be building our pearls list in real time, like chalkboard style here. So I'm just going to type while Manish talks.
So you have to realize it's your grant. How is that person, or how are those people actually going to help you, right? So if you've got 2 people who have, I'm using your example, similar skills, you're not going to need one of them. And then how much do you really need them? Everyone's like, oh, give me 10 or 20%. Yeah, no. Are you really going to be spending 10 hours a week on this? No. You need to figure out how, especially within AHRQ, which has budgeting complexities tied to it, you need to figure out really who's going to put the time, who's going to put the effort, and are you going to get bang for the buck? And the other people, you say, hey, I just don't have the money for it, I'm sorry.
If they're good senior mentors, like, they're not going to care. So at this point, I have 2 very senior mentors who I've worked with, one of whom is like, they're both like 100% funded. They're like, put me on for 2.5%. I'll show up an hour. They don't show up, honestly, they don't show up an hour a week, but it allows me to call them. One of them I transitioned when my grant got cut to putting on as a consultant instead of keeping on at like 2.5%. But you got to justify it. So that's where writing the budget and their justification, like Manish said, is important. And a good mentor is going to be okay with that. The people that need effort are your project managers, your RAs, and your statistician, because you don't want them to not. I have made this mistake as well. I've written grants where I didn't adequately budget for my stats person's time, and then you know what? You don't get the analyses because they can't do a really good analysis on 5% effort. So. can't really, yeah, 2.5 below that, just do a consultant. And if they're not, so one of the great things, if they're not at your institution, you can save yourself the sub money. So everyone always, you guys know what subs are, right? So like this, so I'm at a weird place. I'm at Brown. My grants all go through Rhode Island Hospital. Anyone I work with at Brown has to be a sub. Anyone I work with at my other hospital has to be a sub. Every sub comes with extra indirect costs, right? And so it like, if you have a limited budget, it like starts eating up your budget instantaneously. So if you have folks at other institutions, you can put them on as consultants, which gives them money in their pocket and saves you all of those sub costs.
And maybe to clarify, because we have a range of experience in the room.
Sorry.
So, no, it's okay, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. So the basic NIH framework is you have principal investigator and co-investigators. Co-investigators are often considered key participants or key contributors, meaning they're really part of the science. Then there's consultants, and consultants is a vaguer grab basket of people who will ad hoc advise. And it's a really useful sort of approach or mechanism because consultants can be not paid at all and they don't take effort, so there's not a percentage FTE. You can pay them $2,000 a year and it's like an honorarium. You can do whatever. There's no real rules, and I think in general NH reviewers don't look too hard at that. They look at the co-Is, they look at the team, but the consultants they look at for their expertise, but I would be shocked if a study section really, well, that consultant's not getting anything, or they're getting $5,000, that's weird, because they're only coming once. If they're getting to that level, they're not doing the study section right. So consultants are great, and I agree, especially for outside institutional folks. But I think 2.5% is sort of like the minimum. And yeah, don't let, being your grant is important, because I think for junior folks, sometimes co-Is who are more senior can have their own agenda and push you around a little bit. Oh, I can't do this for more than, and you just have to sort of say, look, you know, this is what it is. Do you want to be part of this or not? Now, obviously, that's a little more delicate, so you can't just be sort of like tough guy. But you have to understand, like, ultimately, the number one fundamental rule of grant applications is you got to get the grant. That's the number one rule. Everything else is secondary, and they should understand that. So that's all that matters, right? Because if the grant doesn't get funded because you had some weird negotiated multi-co-I thing that just stinks, that's not helping anybody.
It is, yeah.
Other questions? Oh, please. Yes. I should introduce our ringer to the panel, Henry Wang, also a very experienced NIH sort of grant writer and stuff. So, Henry, take it away.
The best platform for your first RO1 is someone else's big-ass grant. And so I got my first RO1 by piggybacking on the Regards cohort, which had $70 million of funding behind it, big established infrastructure. I'm just pitching something that's going to be added on to this great infrastructure. I pay for an extra coordinator. I had the benefit perks of all the parent study helping me out. They were going to absorb some of the costs, and I didn't have to pay for a lot of investigator time. And it looked fantastic. One of my other friends used the same cohort to pitched an idea. His first RO1, vitamin D and stroke risk. First submission, scored a 10. Perfect, using that approach. So it really ups the appearance of feasibility of your idea.
I'm going to put one caveat to that. You can also use center grants of various sorts. So if, living my aging world, if you're interested in dementia and you have an Alzheimer's disease research center, they've got a ton of infrastructure there, given if you can navigate the politics around it sometimes. Or whatever the case might be. But I think your point of, if there is some core that you can leverage off of, that's a really great way for your first RO1, if that's possible.
Going back to my original question in that same context, do you blow your investigator status to do that? I mean, obviously it's...
So maybe...
Oh yeah, it's your own grant. Yeah, it's your own grant. You're not giving up your study to someone else. No.
Maybe I'll just jump into that tip of mine.
Yes, right. So let's go through our tips, and we can have a little discussion with each one, but basically we'll lay them all out, and I think that'll be a nice framework for more discussion. Yeah, go for it. What are
So one of my three is exactly protect your ESI status, because you want to use that for when you are PI on that big R-level grant. And what does that mean? So Henry's description, that's a great time to use it, right? You're PI on an R01 or an R18 or an R61. There's like 4,000 numbers that they're throwing into this now. But that R01 level grant, you want to use it for that. What you don't want to use it for is you're co-PI with someone more senior, and then you lose.
By the way, does everybody here know what ESI status means before we make that assumption? Does everyone know? It's okay. No judgment here. Just say if you don't know. This is your chance. Okay, everyone knows. All right, fine.
Pearl's about how to leverage the ESI system. Sometimes they look at your last degree. And so in my case, I accidentally ended up with a second master's, and it reset the clock.
My MPH reset mine.
So my MPH reset mine, but if you are a woman and you are having babies, you need to apply to NIH to get an extension in your ESI status. They have finally changed the policy and recognized that we take leave and that we are not going to be productive for those months or less productive. And so that is an absolute must for anyone who is having children. And I believe adoption is also included, although I'm not 100% sure. People are pushing to allow paternity to be part of that, but yeah.
Did they change that? Because I was told my ESI is, my MD supersedes my
No.
master's,
That's not true.
and that it's based on the,
You need to look on ERA Commons. There's lots of little funky caveats to that. Like HRQ grants do not take away your ESI status.
So
No,
maybe
but your terminal degree. And so if you get an MPH, so I would contact the ESI, the people in charge, and find kind of the terminology, your last degree.
Like, there was a discussion for it to change. I don't think it was ever implemented, but maybe it did, and I just don't know
Okay.
about it.
No, there's some administrator who's in charge of ESI status. I know because I extended mine because of maternity leave. So like, it's like there's some administrative email.
that's weird.
That's weird.
I can tell you with 100% certainty, I lost my ESI status a year and a half ago, and I would still be ESI at this point, and my last degree was 2010. So
One general comment, and then we should probably keep moving along.
yeah, sorry.
Like, and ESI is a great example of this. So if you look at the NIH website and all that stuff, it actually says the R18 does not take away your ESI status, which is false. Because someone that I'm working with, we actually went and talked to NIH directly, and they sent us very clearly the R18, which would make sense, right? It's a $500,000 a year grant. Why wouldn't it take away your ESI status? Takes away your ESI status. So sometimes a little bit of, there's sometimes a little bit of the right hand not knowing what the left hand is saying at times.
Okay, let's keep doing our key points. So you did protect your ESI status.
Can you do all of mine?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's just keep going. And
So I wrote them down so I wouldn't. So the second thing we talked about a little bit, and I'll get to what I think is the most important one, is submit early. So the traditional thinking around this was you want to submit your RO1 early year 4, maybe late year 3, because that's the time you have to get lots of publications and build up the publication track record and all that. That's what my mentors told me when I had a K, et cetera. That's not where the thinking is going now. There's data that's come out of Vanderbilt's KL2 program that was presented to us recently, and I think it makes sense that really that thought that you need those couple extra years to get lots of papers to get the RO1 funded is not what they were seeing. What they were actually seeing is the exact same trajectory of the same number of papers before the RO1 gets submitted, and then the same 2 rounds to get funded. And so the point being, it kind of goes back to what Megan said, is really be strategic. As soon as you get your K award, start thinking about what do you need to start pulling together so you can submit that RO1 really probably late year 2, maybe early year 3, because you're going to need the time, because the success rates, at least what Vanderbilt is showing, and the paper I don't think is out yet, is that it's working about the same, and it's just the delay is unnecessary. I think it comes down to you figuring out what's your personal trajectory, and if you're having trouble with your K or you're having other issues, that might not be fully so. But I know for at least all of my mentees, and I run the KL2 program at Wisconsin for all the KL2s, we're basically saying you should be looking really hard at submitting your RO1 late year 2, early year 3.
Yeah.
It's a couple. There's a couple pieces to it. One's the ESI status, which is new, which is making it a little bit easier for new people. The second is that you're getting the data, you're getting it published early. How much do you really need to get that RO1 done? And maybe we've been very conservative, and you don't need to be as conservative. again, this is one institution's data, and so it's a little.
So I think it depends a little on what your next grant is going to be. So to a certain extent, I did that. So I applied for an R21 at the end of year 2, beginning of year 3, and I got it. So then I had kind of the 2 grants going simultaneously. I did not apply for my RO1 until year 4 because I didn't have that. Like, I needed to show that I had completed my pilot of the RCT. Like, there's no, I mean, maybe I could have like fudged stuff and said, ooh, our recruitment to date is going great. But I think part of the reason I got my R1 on first submission is because I said my recruitment went well, I kept people for follow-up, and I had an effect size. Like,
you're also doing an RCT, which is
different. So if you're like in like a big data world, I think that's true. So the other option is to start thinking about a different type of R01 that's not dependent on your case. So one of my close friends who's at Michigan just got his first R01 on a topic that is perpendicular to his K, but not the same. He's still finishing up his K data collection, so he's going to submit that as a second R01. So I actually think that was brilliant. I wish I had thought to do that. I should have put my R21 as an R01. I hate R21s. I will never apply for one again. They're horrible. But that's like another thing. If you're doing something that is like that you really do need your pilot data, then apply for something parallel with that you can develop. Because during the K, you're not really spending 75% time on your K project, right? You can start something parallel to it.
All right, so other key points.
No, because he has plenty of publications, and he's got great co-Is. So that's where that mentors. That's where selling your team is key. Exactly.
So my last one, I really put into the bucket of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And what it fundamentally comes down to is take your AIMS page, show it around, and get people to rip it to smithereens. So many times you say, oh, you look at my AIMS page, and you get like a little smiley face on it like you got in kindergarten. That's not helpful. At the AGEN meeting, one of the folks who was applying for one of the SAEM grants actually gave us his AIMS page for Jeff Caterino and me to rip apart in public, which I thought was incredibly brave. But that's really helpful. And so do it with your AIMS page, do it with your grant. Your institutions often have mock study sections, or if you're working with a center or something, they'll have a mock study section. Have them go through that. Every little piece you can do to make it better is going to help. One of the guys I used to work with when I was at Rochester, he used to send it to his brother, who's a Hollywood scriptwriter. And his feeling was if his brother could read the grant, understand it, and it came across well, then it would be good. And his brother would have all sorts. You need a graphic here, and you need this here,
which is key.
Stuff we don't think about necessarily, but you really want to do it. I've always tried to get my wife to read it, and she refuses, so don't threaten that. But I think the thing is really have people look at it, have people make comments, and choose people that are going to be brutal on your grant.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I got my R01, so I would say actually choose people who, the screenwriter, but like have someone who's not emergency medicine. So I have like 2 or 3 people who I work with. We don't get offended when we write grants without each other, but like I have like a psych PhD at Rochester who reads my grants and I read his, and we both got our R1. So I think that's critical. Yeah, Henry, you have a...
So I've migrated to using a professional grant reading consultant because they can spend the time with it. Your colleagues on campus will never give you the
I'm
quality
mixed about
feedback.
them. We engaged one for a couple of grants at Brown, and I felt like they gave crap.
It's hit
Poor
or miss.
It's very dependent on the individual.
All right, I'm going to do my top
do
3
your
for
3.
the sake of time. So mine you've kind of heard a little bit of already. So my first is to write your budget in conjunction with your aims. They will inform each other. Don't promise anyone a position on that grant until you've written your budget and your aims. Because the worst thing is to be like, oh, will you write this with me? Will you write this with me? And then you're like, oh, I can't afford any of you, right? So write your budget with your aims. Have a senior mentor who's going to walk you through it the first time, who's not going to get offended if you don't put them on for a ton of effort. But that's my first one. The second is, I think we've all alluded to this already, but not just if it doesn't kill you, make you stronger, but if at first you don't succeed, try again. We have a lot of friends and colleagues who have stories about all the number of times they've had to submit a K. The same thing about people who've had to submit Rs 3, 4, 6, 9 times, and then all of a sudden are 100% funded. So just keep trying. Truly, resilience in this field is critical. And then the third one is to be organized and meticulous and make sure that your first submission is your best submission. There are a lot of people who say, just write it and put it in. I think that is a horrible idea because then you are biasing your study section to think that you're sloppy, and you're going to then have to respond to all of their critiques in your resubmit. Do your best the first time. having sat on study sections, having seen mentees grants, having seen colleagues grants, like be organized, make sure your references are right, make sure that your graphics are labeled correctly, do all of that incredibly annoying clerical work to make sure that it is a perfect package when you submit it. And they may hate the science, but then you can go and respond to that instead of them judging and thinking you're just not a good, like, that you're not trustworthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even, you know, spelling, sentence structure, all that stuff. Because what happens is as we're reading it on study section, and all three of us serve on study sections, you start getting this theme, right? So you're like, well, this grant is really annoying me. But then you start coming up with reasons to kill the grant, not actually anything else. And so it's those little things are really critical.
Well, because if they're putting a spelling error on their specific games page, you really think they're going to do good science?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, these technical things are so relevant because you have to understand, having been in study section is really revealing. We're all busy, right? All the people reviewing grants are super busy. Many of these folks are just reading your grant for the first time on the plane to DC over a whiskey and scotch. Or my first study section, I woefully underprepared and woefully didn't realize. I pulled an all-nighter before the thing, being like, holy smokes, I can't embarrass myself tomorrow. So it was so painful. I was like, all right, I just screwed up. Like, it happens, right? And because of that, we're human. You get very biased by things that aren't necessarily a computer analysis of the logic of the grant. So like a figure that's all jacked up, or like a typos. These things just stick in your head and it sends you in these bias threads. It's totally unfair, but we're humans, and humans are reviewing these grants, reviewing things quickly. So you just cannot have jacked up sentences or typos or some weird line that sort of goes a weird way. You just can't. It should be irrelevant, but it's just not where you want to be.
Your turn, bud.
All right, and this is going to be an interesting challenge to type as I go. But okay, good. I was sort of doing some fancy formatting. But, you know.
Aren't you fancy pants? Oh, look at he's got colors.
Yeah.
Are these
well,
like...
see, I was like doing that thing, like making it pretty, making it...
So I'm going to copy and paste
play,
to
play as you want. It's all good.
Okay.
So one of my key points, and there's two schools of thought, so just know that what I'm about to say, some people might disagree, and I'll give you both sides, but I'll tell you what I feel. So for any given grant offering, there's a program officer, and they're listed on the NIH website. And you can contact them, and they're happy to be listed. And they aren't the reviewers, so they can't really hurt you. I'm a big believer in getting in touch with them early and working with them. Now, there's another school that says, it's irrelevant, don't, it could lead you in the wrong directions, they're not reviewing it anyway, just submit the thing. No, and I'll give you a story as to why I think that's not true. So first of all, they want the best submissions coming into NIH, right? So they want to help you make your grant better. And they've had a lot of experience looking at grants. So they'll throw you some advice on sort of, well, this doesn't make sense, or this isn't quite responsive to this thing, have you thought about this other thing? So they can help you. But here's the real inner secret sauce of the thing. So there's a two-step process to get an NIH grant. The first step is the study section, where peer reviewers score the grant. They don't give out the money. They're just an advisory group to the NIH saying this is the order of the best grants to worst grants in this thing. NIH, you decide who gets the money. Then and there's this magical statement, it goes to council. You know you're dealing with a player in the grant world and say, oh yeah, my thing just went to council. That means it goes to the second step, so it's been scored, and now it goes to the NIH and they give out the money. That is a secret internal process for which there's no notes, no disclosure, no peer review, and then it just says, okay, we got the scores and here's the money. Now, probably 99% of the time, they just go down the list based on scores. If they didn't, there would be all sorts of fears of bias and whatever. But here's what happens. They go down the list, and maybe they have a little money left over, and they can do like one more grant down the list. Or maybe they're short a little money, and they have to make a decision, and there's two grants that are pretty similarly scored at the bubble. NIH program officers make those decisions. Not unilaterally, and they probably try their best to do it without bias and such. But nonetheless, there's a little bit of funkiness at the margin. And I'll tell you, I had this R that was submitted that was scored well, but like right at the pay line margin. And we were working on a resubmission. But I had gotten really close to the program officer, a lot of back and forth, a lot of scientific stuff. We liked each other. We're doing this whole thing. And then as I'm working on my resubmission, even though they said, I probably won't get funded this cycle, all of a sudden it was funded in the first cycle. And I got the pleasure of like just throwing out my resubmission. And I really think it was her, to be honest with you. I think I was right on the bubble. They had a little more money. She really believed in what I was doing. She probably advocated for me at council and got funded. So couldn't hurt, could maybe help. So I think early when you're working on it, contact the program officer 3 or 4 months ahead. Say, I'm thinking about this grant. Do you mind looking at the names page or just having a phone call to give me some advice? And as I said, it could be helpful. I don't know if others have thoughts on that.
I think the one caveat I'll put on that is the program officers don't know the study section. So I've had the opposite experience where this program officer was like, this is not going to get funded. There's no way. And it was an RO3. It got funded first round. It got like 16 or 18. I forgot what it got.
And I've had program officers who are amazing, and I've had program officers that were like a total freaking waste of my time.
Fair enough.
So this is being recorded. Can you delete that?
So I think the way to synthesize these opinions is you have to use your judgment. So reach out to them, and if you think they're like just not helpful or whatever, just like fine. But if you find the conversation useful, continue the conversation. Is that a good synthesis?
It can't hurt is the bottom line. It can't hurt.
Most program officers are amazing.
We love the NIH. Hot mic.
I was just going to say, it seems like at a minimum, like when you're first starting out and don't really know the institute necessarily very well, at least like making sure you're in their zone.
Yeah.
Like whether
it doesn't hurt to reach out.
That's what I've been told to do, is sort of like just call them and make sure your submission would seem like it would fit in their portfolio, because for emergency care research, it's not always clear. Is this going to go to this institute or this?
And I'll give you an anecdote. I'm working on an hour right now.
And then, sorry, Ben, I'm just going to let you know we've got about 2 minutes.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. I'll just move on. And actually,
I want your anecdote, but we need your last point, too.
It's good. She's being a good moderator. My final point is sort of related to First Don't Succeed, Keep Trying. It's really shots on goal. So I think this is more an image I try to leave everybody with, that sometimes it's not actually the quality but the quantity. And here's the analogy I want to leave you with. I'll explain what I mean by that, because I heard Megan snark on that because she said it's got to be the best. I agree with that. Okay, it's both. Here's my point. The analogy is a soccer game. Okay, in soccer, usually the team with more shots on goal wins because most shots get blocked, but every so often a shot gets through, and games are won 1-0. If you get an R, you're good, right? So all you need is 1 for starters. So 1-0. It has to be technically at a certain level. If a person shoots at the goal and it's not hit hard enough, not with enough spin, maybe it's a little bit out, it will not succeed. So it doesn't matter what the goalie does. So it's got to be technically correct. And it's good. It's got to be your best shot. But even your best shots often don't get funded. So you take a lot of your best shots, and every so often catch the goalie looking a little funny or the angle is quite right. So just know that you got to submit a lot of grants. That it's not. Yes, you want to make sure your grant is the best, but it also takes a lot of attempts. I think the average yield is sort of 1 in 8 or 1 in 9 on average. Yes. Meaning, like, you don't just submit one RO1 and call it a day. And I think I'm not so different from that. I haven't actually done my math.
So I just added one, which is don't kill yourself. It's not worth it. So yes, take shots on goal, but like, man, I have friends that are putting in like 2 grants every cycle. That's bonkers. Yeah. Like, don't, like, yes, you want to get an R1, but like.
No 2 grants per NH cycle.
I don't even think 1 grant per cycle. I mean, like 1 grant per cycle maybe if you don't have any other grants that you're trying to do, but like you still need to do your other good science. Like,
agreed.
I think there's a balance. And then I also think I've seen a lot of people who get way overfunded and then start doing really poor science and become really unhappy people. And yes, it's better. If you're overfunded, that's a great problem to have. But like at the end of the day, we have our clinical jobs. Don't kill yourself. It's just not worth it. Like, this is wonderful. Doing good science is really important. If you're someone who loves putting a grant in a cycle, go for it.
Oh, I don't put in a grant cycle.
Yeah, me neither.
No.
I just want to temper that shots on goal thing, because I think that many of us type A personalities might like
overinterpret that. Yeah,
I think
that's fair.
I'm going to tweak your shots on goal because I think I'm in between the two.
This is good. You're hearing some differring opinions.
So
this is exactly
you can take the same grant and shoot it to a bunch of places.
Yes, fair enough.
So you write the grant. If I have to remember to redo the lit search for some of the stuff that I do because I just basically copy the first couple paragraphs of the significant in every grant. But it's okay if you're going to take an RO1 and send it to NIH, and then you're going to tweak it and send it to AHA, and then you're going to tweak that and send it to SAEM.
Yeah, totally.
That's a really good way to do it. If you're writing 2 completely different grants at the same time, you're going to be a number 10 over there.
Agreed. Totally agreed. And grants should be shopped around. So there you go. Any final questions? We've got our key points. If you guys want, we could scroll through if you want to take pictures of it if it's useful.
Maybe we can,
how do we know who's in the room?
Here, can I, hold on, let me put it in a regular view so that you can actually see it here. Hold on. There
Oh,
you go.
that's good. You can take out one photograph and you got all our 10 points. That's nice. See, you came away with a productive deliverable. And obviously, some of these may not apply in your specific situation, so caveat, right? This is just general guidance.
Don't hold Abella responsible.
Don't come after me, exactly.
Your chair's going to be like, you know.
Who's that guy? Right, totally.
Thank you, guys.
And,
Thanks for
yeah,
coming.
Thanks a lot. Hope you found this helpful.
Yeah. I wish
And
we
good
had more
luck with your
time.
grant submissions.